Most people think confidence comes from adding something. More control, more certainty, more answers. But what if it quietly grows when something is finally set down? There's a kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from what happens to us, but from what we keep bracing for, day after day. Maybe you've felt it too, that invisible tension humming beneath even the calmest moments. This story begins there, in that familiar place where the heart is tired of holding everything together. It follows someone who carried his worries so carefully that they became part of his posture, part of the way he moved through the world. From the outside, he seemed steady, dependable, composed, the sort of person who never made a fuss. Inside, though, every uncertain possibility felt like a thread he had to keep from unraveling. He didn't know there was another way to live, one that didn't require constant vigilance. Not yet, anyway. Because sometimes the change we're waiting for doesn't arrive as a breakthrough, but as a quiet encounter that gently rearranges what we believe we must carry. A conversation, a pause, a small moment of noticing, things so subtle they almost slip past unnoticed, and yet they can open a door we didn't realize had always been there. What happens after that door opens is rarely dramatic, but it is deeply freeing. This story is about that kind of freedom. If you've ever wished for a calmer mind without knowing where to begin, you may recognize pieces of yourself along the way. Not in a heavy, uncomfortable sense, but in the way a familiar melody makes you pause because it understands something wordless. There's relief in discovering that anxiety isn't a life sentence, only a habit that learned how to stay. And there's a quiet confidence waiting underneath, patient and unhurried. Sometimes all it needs is permission to surface. So take a slow breath, as if you don't have to rush anywhere for the next little while. Imagine setting something down beside you, even if only in your mind, just to see how it feels. You don't have to believe anything yet, don't have to fix or solve or prove. Just listen, the way you might listen to a story told softly in a dimly lit room. Because by the end, you may find that what you were searching for was never far away at all. He carried it the way some people carry their phones, always within reach, even when there was no real need. It was a small leather satchel slung across his chest, though it seemed to weigh far more than its size allowed. Inside were smooth gray stones he had collected over the years, each one representing a worry he couldn't quite set down. Even on quiet mornings, when the air was soft and forgiving, his hand would drift to the satchel as if checking whether the weight was still there. It always was, steady and familiar, like a dull ache you learn to live around. In cafes, he would sit by the window and rehearse conversations that hadn't happened yet, stirring a cup long gone cold. If someone laughed across the room, he'd wonder if he might someday be the reason for such laughter, or the target of it. His mind had a habit of wandering into futures where everything unraveled in slow, humiliating detail. Meanwhile, the present moment waited patiently, like an unclaimed coat on the back of a chair. He rarely noticed how peaceful things actually were, because he was busy bracing for when they wouldn't be. People often described him as calm, which he accepted with a polite nod that felt almost like an apology. They couldn't see how tightly he held himself together, like a glass trying not to crack under invisible pressure. Sometimes, after a long day of appearing fine, he would loosen the satchel and feel the stones press against his ribs, heavy and cool. It comforted him in a strange way, proof that his tension had somewhere to go. Still, there was a loneliness in carrying something no one else could see. Once, while waiting at a crosswalk with no cars in sight, he realized he was gripping the satchel as if it might run away. The light changed, people moved, and he stayed frozen a second too long, caught in the quiet absurdity of it. What would it feel like, he wondered, to cross the street with empty hands? The thought was so unfamiliar it almost made him laugh, a soft breath of disbelief. He stepped forward anyway, though the weight came with him. That night, he placed the satchel on the table before bed but didn't open it, just rested his palm on the worn leather. The room was still, the kind of stillness that asks nothing from you. For a fleeting moment, he imagined leaving it there until morning, letting the stones keep their silence on their own. His hand lingered, unsure, as if the decision mattered more than it should. Somewhere in that hesitation, the faint outline of another way began to form, though he couldn't yet name it. Morning arrived quietly, spilling a pale ribbon of light across the table where the satchel still rested. He watched it from the doorway, half expecting the familiar pull of urgency, the reflex to grab it before the day could begin. But nothing happened. and the stillness felt oddly spacious, like a room he hadn't realized was cramped until the walls moved back. He stepped closer, noticing how the leather looked softer when it wasn't clutched in his fist. For a moment, he wondered if the weight depended on how tightly he held it. He had always believed that staying alert kept disaster at bay, as though worry were a kind of guard dog pacing the perimeter. If he loosened his grip, surely something would slip through, some hidden chaos waiting for permission. Yet standing there, he sensed a quieter truth pressing gently at the edges of that belief. The world hadn't rushed in overnight to punish his brief lapse in vigilance. It simply waited, patient and unconcerned, like a tide that doesn't need chasing. Later, as he walked through the park, the satchel resting lightly against his side, he noticed how his shoulders lowered when he stopped anticipating every possible misstep. A child stumbled nearby, then laughed as if falling were part of the game, not a failure to be prevented. He found himself smiling at the ease of it, at the way the child trusted the ground to hold him. Something inside him softened, the way clenched fingers slowly remember how to open. Perhaps stability wasn't something you forced into place, but something that appeared when you stopped wrestling the air. He sat on a weathered bench and let the satchel slide beside him, testing the uneasy freedom of empty hands. The breeze moved through the trees without asking permission, carrying the faint scent of rain that might or might not arrive. He realized how much of his life had been spent trying to outrun a future that hadn't even decided to happen. The chase had been exhausting, like running on a path that keeps extending itself just to stay ahead. And here he was, finally standing still enough to see there had never been a finish line. As the sky shifted into a softer shade of afternoon, he placed one finger on the satchel's strap, not lifting it yet, just feeling its presence without surrendering to it. A quiet thought surfaced, that maybe confidence wasn't built by tightening every knot but by trusting the rope to hold even when left alone. The idea felt fragile, almost shy, as if it might retreat if examined too closely. He sat with it anyway, sensing that this small pause was less an ending than the opening of a door he hadn't noticed before. He began arranging his days around avoidance the way some people arrange furniture, carefully, so nothing sharp faced outward. Invitations were declined with gentle excuses. Phone calls returned hours too late to matter. Opportunities allowed to pass like buses he pretended not to see. The satchel never left his side, its strap a quiet boundary between him and the unpredictable world. It wasn't that he didn't long for more. It was that longing felt safer when kept hypothetical. After all, dreams couldn't embarrass you if they never left the room. At work, he kept his ideas folded inside his mind like letters he wasn't sure anyone wanted to read. When discussions turned lively, he would nod thoughtfully, as though silence were a sign of wisdom rather than fear. Once, a colleague asked his opinion directly, and the sudden spotlight made his pulse scatter like startled birds. He answered quickly, then replayed the moment for hours, cataloging every imagined mistake. By evening, the stones in the satchel seemed heavier, as if disappointment had its own gravity. His world shrank so gradually he hardly noticed, like a shoreline retreating one quiet inch at a time. Places he used to enjoy began to feel crowded with possibility, which was somehow more frightening than emptiness. Even simple kindness from strangers made him uneasy, as though it came with expectations he might fail to meet. He told himself he preferred a small life, neat and manageable, though sometimes the words sounded rehearsed. In quieter moments, he wondered what parts of himself had been left outside that carefully drawn circle. The realization came on a rainy afternoon when he watched someone else step into an opportunity he had secretly hoped for. He felt a flicker of something sharp, not envy exactly, but the ache of a door closing without ever being opened. His hand tightened around the satchel, the stones pressing into his palm as if reminding him why he had hesitated. For the first time, the weight didn't feel protective. It felt costly, like a toll he hadn't agreed to pay. He stood there longer than necessary, listening to the rain say nothing at all. That evening, he loosened the satchel and let it rest on the floor beside his chair, studying it with a kind of wary curiosity. How much of his life had been shaped around carrying it, he wondered, and who he might have been without it. The question lingered in the room, quiet but insistent, like a melody you can't quite place. He didn't reach for the stones, didn't add a new one, just sat with the unfamiliar space between his hands. Somewhere in that space, a faint readiness stirred as though something, or someone, might soon step into view. A few days later, he finally opened the satchel while sitting on the edge of his bed. as though expecting the stones to object. They were smoother than he remembered, worn down by years of quiet handling, each one cool against his fingertips. He lifted one and felt an immediate tightening in his chest, the familiar tug of a future that hadn't happened yet. It was strange how something so small could pull his whole body forward into tension. He set it back gently, like returning a fragile thought to its shelf. He began noticing how the satchel seemed to grow heavier whenever his mind wandered too far ahead. Standing in line at a bakery, imagining everything that could go wrong in a simple conversation, he felt the strap bite into his shoulder. Yet when he focused on the warmth of the bread in the air or the hum of quiet chatter, the weight softened, almost shyly. It was as if the stones fed on distance from the present, swelling in the space between now and what if. The realization felt oddly personal, like discovering the burden had been listening all along. One afternoon he tried carrying the satchel in his hands instead of over his shoulder, curious about the difference. The effort made his arms ache quickly, forcing him to confront the strain he usually spread across his body. He paused under a tree, setting it down beside him, and noticed how the ground accepted the weight without complaint. For a moment, he wondered why he had never trusted the earth to hold what he couldn't. The thought felt both comforting and unsettling, like realizing a door had never been locked. As the days passed, the satchel became less of a background presence and more like a quiet companion whose moods he was learning to read. When worry surged, the leather stiffened, the stones shifting restlessly inside as if asking for attention. When he breathed slowly, just a few steady inhales, nothing dramatic, the tension eased, the satchel settling into a softer shape. He found himself experimenting in small ways, curious about how much influence he actually had. It felt almost like learning a language he had once known as a child. One evening, he placed the satchel on the table and stepped back, noticing how the room felt different with a little distance between them. The object that had defined his posture for so long now sat quietly, no larger than it had ever been. He tilted his head, studying it with a hint of cautious humor, as if seeing an old illusion from a new angle. Maybe the weight had never been entirely inside the stones, he thought, but in the way he carried them. The idea lingered there, unfinished, just as a soft knock sounded at the door he wasn't expecting anyone to open. When he opened the door, he found an older woman standing there with a canvas bag of oranges resting against her hip. She smiled with the easy warmth of someone who had nowhere urgent to be, as if time moved more gently around her. "I think these were meant for you," she said, though neither of them questioned how she had chosen his door. Her gaze drifted past him to the satchel on the table, not with curiosity, but with recognition. It was the kind of look that made explanations feel unnecessary. She stepped inside at his quiet invitation, placing the oranges down as though offering something more than fruit. The room filled with a faint citrus scent, bright and grounding, and he realized how long it had been since something simple had felt new. Without asking, she touched the satchel lightly, testing its weight with a practiced hand. "You've been carrying this a long time," she murmured, not as a question, but as a gentle observation. He nodded, surprised by how relieving it felt not to pretend otherwise. They sat across from each other, the satchel between them like a small, stubborn animal that refused to leave. Her presence was calm in a way that didn't demand anything from him, and he felt his shoulders loosen before he noticed they had been tense. "I used to carry one too," she said softly, tracing the worn leather with her fingertip. "Thought it kept me safe, or at least prepared." There was a quiet humor in her voice, the kind that comes from having made peace with old fears. He found himself asking why she had stopped, the question slipping out before he could dress it in politeness. She leaned back, eyes thoughtful, as if searching for the simplest way to explain something that had taken years to understand. "Because I realized it wasn't mine to carry," she said at last, her tone so matter-of-fact it almost startled him. The words settled into the room, gentle but undeniable, like dust drifting into sunlight. He glanced at the satchel, suddenly unsure who it belonged to anymore. For a while, neither of them spoke, the silence feeling less like emptiness and more like space being cleared. He noticed how her hands rested loosely in her lap, unburdened, as though they trusted the world to meet them halfway. Something in that posture stirred a quiet longing he hadn't known how to name before. He reached toward the satchel, then hesitated, aware that this small movement might change more than he could predict. The woman watched with patient eyes, as if she knew he was standing at the edge of something he couldn't yet see. "Many of the stories you hear here aren't just stories. They reflect the invisible weight you may be carrying every day. If you're tired of holding pain, responsibility, and guilt that were never yours, I created an ebook called The Weight of Stones That Are Not Yours and More 2 bonus for you. It's for those who want to let go, set boundaries, and live with more lightness. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. The woman leaned forward slightly, her expression gentle, as if she were about to share something easily misunderstood. She asked him to lift the satchel, not with strain, just enough to feel its familiar pull. Then she placed her hand beneath it, guiding it slowly back to the table, as though demonstrating a simple forgotten motion. "You see," she said softly, "your body already knows how to put it down." The ease of it made him blink, surprised by how natural the movement had felt. She opened the satchel and lifted one of the stones, holding it between her palms like a small, quiet secret. "Most of these," she continued, "are made from things that haven't happened and may never happen." Her voice carried no judgment, only a calm clarity that made resistance feel unnecessary. She set the stone on the table, where it looked smaller somehow, less commanding than it had inside the bag. He watched it closely, half expecting it to roll back on its own. "Uncertainty isn't a storm chasing you," she said, meeting his eyes with a steady kindness. "It's more like an open field, uncomfortable because there's nothing to hide behind." The idea felt both unsettling and strangely relieving, like stepping into fresh air after a long time indoors. He realized how much effort he had spent building shelter from a sky that hadn't threatened rain. His shoulders eased, though he hadn't told them to. She invited him to stand, then gently straightened his posture with a light touch between his shoulders. Without the satchel pulling him forward, he felt taller, though nothing about his height had changed. "Confidence grows in empty hands," she whispered, stepping back as if to let him discover the truth of it on his own. He inhaled slowly, noticing how the breath traveled further than usual, reaching places that had felt compressed for years. It was such a small shift, yet it carried the quiet dignity of something reclaimed. They remained there in silence, the stone resting harmlessly on the table, the satchel slumped beside it like a retired guard. He flexed his fingers, unsure what to do with hands that weren't occupied by holding on. A faint nervousness fluttered through him, but it wasn't the sharp panic he expected, more like the tremble before trying something new. He glanced at the door, at the window, at the ordinary world waiting without instruction. For the first time, uncertainty didn't feel like an enemy, just a wide path disappearing into soft light. The next morning, he woke with the uneasy sensation of forgetting something important, only to realize the satchel was still on the table where he had left it. For a moment he stood there, debating whether to sling it over his shoulder out of habit. Instead, he picked up a single stone and slipped it into his pocket, leaving the rest behind like a quiet experiment. The lightness felt suspicious, as if the day might notice and correct the imbalance. Still, he stepped outside before he could change his mind. At the bakery, when the cashier spoke too quickly and he didn't catch her words, the familiar spark of embarrassment flickered. His hand moved toward his pocket, brushing the smooth surface of the lone stone, and he paused. He took one slow breath, then another, the way the woman had shown him without ever calling it a lesson. "Sorry, could you repeat that?" he asked, voice steadier than he expected. The world didn't collapse. The cashier simply smiled and did. He began practicing in moments so small they almost escaped notice, waiting in line without rehearsing disaster, letting a conversation end without replaying it for flaws. Each time the urge to tighten returned, he pressed the stone lightly and imagined setting it down somewhere unseen. Relief arrived in brief, surprising waves, followed by a nervous glance over his shoulder for consequences. None came, though the absence of them felt strange, like silence after a long, constant noise. He started to suspect that control had been more illusion than protection. Days passed, and people seemed to respond to him differently, though he couldn't pinpoint why. A colleague lingered at his desk to chat, remarking that he looked well-rested, which made him laugh softly because sleep hadn't changed much. Even his posture shifted, shoulders settling into a quieter alignment, as if they trusted the ground again. Decisions that once felt like traps now appeared as simple crossroads, neither demanding nor threatening. He moved through them with cautious curiosity, surprised by his own steadiness. One evening, he returned home and placed the stone back into the satchel, noticing how little he wanted to fill it again. The bag no longer called to him the way it once had. It waited, patient, but no longer in charge. He sat beside it, reflecting on how change had arrived, not as a grand gesture, but as a series of small permissions. Outside, the sky deepened into a calm blue-gray, the kind that holds both endings and beginnings without choosing between them. He sensed another test of this quiet strength approaching, though he couldn't yet see its shape. A few days later, he found himself standing at the entrance of a gathering he would once have avoided entirely. Voices drifted through the doorway, warm and unpredictable, carrying the familiar risk of awkward pauses and misunderstood words. His hand brushed the satchel at home out of reflex, then remembered it wasn't there, which made him smile with a hint of disbelief. For a moment he simply stood, feeling the quiet steadiness in his chest like a small anchor. Then he stepped inside before his thoughts could rehearse an escape. A conversation opened beside him, imperfect and ordinary, and he let himself answer without polishing every word. When someone disagreed gently with his opinion, the old tension stirred but didn't take over. He imagined setting a stone down between them, letting the space remain open instead of filling it with defense. The discussion shifted naturally, like a river finding a new curve, and he realized no one was keeping score. The air felt lighter, as though his calm had quietly adjusted the room's gravity. Later, he shared a story that made a few people laugh, the kind of laughter that feels like being welcomed rather than examined. He noticed how his voice stayed steady, even when all eyes turned toward him, not because he controlled the moment, but because he allowed it to unfold. The possibility of imperfection hovered nearby, yet it no longer felt dangerous, just human. Someone clapped his shoulder with an easy friendliness, and he accepted it without wondering what it meant. It was a small exchange, but it lingered warmly. When he stepped outside for fresh air, the night greeted him with a soft breeze and the distant hum of passing cars. He realized he wasn't replaying the evening in his mind, wasn't searching for hidden mistakes to carry home. Instead, he felt a quiet pride, not loud or triumphant, just a gentle acknowledgement of having stayed present. The world seemed less like a maze and more like an open street, imperfect but navigable. He breathed in deeply, noticing how natural it felt. As he walked home, he caught his reflection in a darkened shop window and paused, curious about the person looking back. There was a calm there he hadn't practiced, only uncovered, like a surface cleared of dust. He tilted his head slightly, almost amused by how ordinary confidence looked from the outside. It didn't glow or announce itself. It simply stood there, steady and unafraid of being seen. He continued on, unaware that someone else, watching quietly from a nearby bench, had noticed the change too. The next morning, he sat by the window with the satchel resting quietly at his feet, sunlight touching its worn edges. He realized he no longer feared opening it, though he no longer felt compelled to either. Instead, he closed his eyes for a moment and imagined lifting out just one stone, not with his hands, but with his attention. He pictured placing it on the floor beside him, hearing the soft, harmless sound it would make. The image alone seemed to ease something in his chest, like loosening a knot you didn't know you were tightening. He began a small ritual, simple enough to fit between two breaths, something no one else would notice. Inhale slowly, as if gathering the weight. Exhale gently, as if setting it down. He didn't force calm to arrive, just made a little space where it might choose to land. Some mornings it did, settling around him like a light blanket. Other mornings it stayed just out of reach. Either way, the practice felt like a quiet promise he kept to himself. Later that day, when an unexpected message stirred the old flicker of anxiety, he paused before reacting. He placed his palm over his pocket, where no stone weighted anymore, and imagined the satchel resting far away on the floor. One slow breath in, one slow breath out. Less than a minute, yet enough to soften the sharp edges of the moment. He answered the message simply, without rehearsing every possible misunderstanding. The relief that followed was small but sincere, like finding a forgotten coin in your coat. He started suggesting the exercise silently to others, not with words but with presence. When a friend spoke with hurried tension, he listened calmly, giving them the kind of space he had learned to give himself. It was curious how steadiness could travel between people without needing explanation. He noticed that sometimes, just by not rushing, the atmosphere around him would settle too. It felt like placing an invisible stone down where everyone could step around it. That evening he returned home and nudged the satchel gently with his foot, a playful gesture he wouldn't have dared before. It no longer seemed like an object of authority, just a container waiting for instructions he might never give. He sat beside it, breathing slowly, wondering how many people were carrying their own unseen weight at that very moment. The thought filled him with a quiet tenderness, a sense of connection that stretched beyond his small room. Somewhere in that feeling, a deeper understanding began to form, as if the story were preparing to reveal its final, quiet truth. On a quiet morning washed in pale gold, he carried the satchel to the edge of a wide, open field just beyond the town. The grass moved in slow waves, whispering without urgency, as if time itself had decided to rest there. He stood for a while, feeling the familiar weight in his hands, noticing how different it felt now. Not heavier, not lighter, simply no longer in charge. When he set it down, the earth received it without ceremony. He straightened, surprised by how natural it felt to remain standing without reaching back for it. The sky stretched above him, vast and undecided, holding both clouds and clear blue without choosing sides. He realized uncertainty had always been like this, spacious, not suffocating, waiting to be walked through rather than fought. A quiet strength settled into his chest, not sharp or dramatic, just steady as a heartbeat you trust without thinking. He took a few steps forward, then a few more, testing the lightness as if it might vanish. It didn't, and he found himself smiling at nothing in particular. Somewhere behind him, the satchel remained where he had left it, small against the endless field. He understood then that confidence didn't need to announce its arrival or prove itself to anyone. It was the simple willingness to keep walking even when the path dissolved into open space. The stones had not been enemies, only reminders of how strong he had been all along. Now they were just stones, resting quietly in a place that no longer required his vigilance. A breeze passed through, lifting the edges of his shirt, carrying the scent of sun-warmed earth and something faintly sweet. He closed his eyes briefly, letting the sensation move through him without trying to hold it. Freedom, he realized, wasn't loud or dazzling. It was this gentle permission to be unguarded. When he opened his eyes, the horizon seemed closer, as though the world had stepped forward to meet him. He walked toward it, unhurried, trusting the ground to continue appearing beneath his feet. Far off, a figure watched from the shade of a solitary tree, the woman with the canvas bag, her expression calm and knowing. She didn't call out or wave, only nodded once as if acknowledging a journey completed in silence. He didn't see her, but he felt the quiet encouragement all the same, like a memory that warms rather than aches. The field stretched on, open and luminous, holding no trace of the weight he once carried, and somewhere in that vast, forgiving light, his steps blended into the rhythm of a life no longer measured by fear